On this bleak November morning, the drizzle fell like needles, piercing the icy air as Henry Carter stepped out of his modest apartment. His frayed coat, barely enough to shield him from the biting cold, hung heavy on his thin shoulders. The deep lines etched across his face spoke of resilience, decades of sacrifice, and a quiet pride that had carried him through a lifetime of hardships. Today, however, something stirred within him, a defiant determination to claim a moment of triumph he had long denied himself. For Henry, this wasn't just another day. It was the day he would step into Maybach Motors, a showroom gleaming with wealth and exclusivity, to purchase a car that most men in his position would never even dare to dream of. This wasn't about luxury. To Henry, the Maybach symbolized far more than polished steel and fine leather. It was a declaration, a reminder that years of toil, perseverance, and silent endurance could not erase his worth. Before we dive into this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, let's get started. His son, Daniel Carter, had insisted on this journey. As the billionaire CEO of a major corporation, Daniel had often tried to share his wealth with his father, only to be met with polite refusal. But this time, he'd been resolute. "Dad, it's not just a car," Daniel had told him. "It's a celebration of you. Of everything you've given me. Of everything you've endured." Daniel's success, built on the values Henry had instilled in him, honesty, hard work, and an unshakable belief in justice, was a testament to his father's legacy. Every step Henry took through the rain carried the weight of a lifetime of selflessness. This wasn't just a journey to buy a car, it was a journey to honor his past, his sacrifices, and the values he had fought to uphold. Yet, as the glass doors of the showroom came into view, Henry couldn't shake the feeling that this moment of pride might not come without a fight. As Henry approached the towering glass doors of Maybach Motors, his reflection caught his eye, an older man with a weathered face, calloused hands, and a demeanor shaped by decades of struggle. The sight triggered a wave of memories from his youth in the segregated South, a time when being a black man meant enduring relentless barriers and injustices. He could still feel the sting of humiliation from being denied entry to certain restaurants, forced to drink from colored-only water fountains, and forbidden to walk down certain streets. These were wounds that left scars, not on his body, but on his spirit. Yet those same scars had become the source of his unyielding resolve. In those moments of rejection, Henry had vowed to rise above the hatred, not through confrontation, but by building a life of dignity and purpose. Every injustice he faced became fuel to create a future where his children would never know the same pain. Today, as he stood on the brink of claiming a long-denied victory, those memories didn't weaken him, they fortified his resolve. As Henry stepped through the grand glass doors of Maybach Motors, the first thing that struck him was the pristine brilliance of the space. Marble floors stretched endlessly, gleaming like freshly polished mirrors. Every inch of the showroom radiated opulence, from the dramatic spotlights illuminating the cars to the soft hum of hushed conversations between impeccably dressed customers and staff. The air itself seemed rarefied, carrying a subtle scent of leather and luxury that whispered exclusivity. Henry couldn't help but notice how his presence seemed to disrupt the polished serenity of the room. His scuffed shoes squeaked faintly against the marble, and his coat, worn at the edges, felt almost like a scarlet letter. A couple browsing nearby cast a fleeting glance in his direction before turning back to the sleek black Maybach in front of them, their expressions unreadable but unmistakably dismissive. Behind the reception desk sat Amanda Hayes, a young woman with a demeanor as sharp as the perfectly pressed lines of her blazer. Her blonde ponytail swayed slightly as she tapped on her phone, her nails glinting with a fresh coat of polish. She didn't look up until Henry stood directly in front of her. When she finally raised her eyes, they swept over him with a flicker of thinly veiled judgment. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone laced with impatience, as though she were speaking to someone who had clearly wandered into the wrong place. "Yes," Henry replied evenly, his voice warm despite the chill in hers. "I'd like to see one of your Maybach models, the S-Class." Amanda's lips twitched into what might have been a smirk. "The S-Class?" she repeated, drawing out the words. That's a premium model. Are you sure you're in the right place? Henry met her gaze calmly. I am, he said. I've done my research. I know exactly what I'm looking for. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather notebook, flipping it open to a page where he had meticulously written down details about the car. Amanda barely glanced at it before leaning back in her chair, arms crossed. Well, sir, the S-Class starts at over $200,000, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. That's before taxes, of course. Henry nodded, unfazed. I'm aware, he replied. Amanda let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. And how exactly do you plan on paying for it? Cash? Or are we thinking about financing, over 30 years? Her words, though wrapped in a veneer of professionalism, were razor sharp. Before Henry could respond, the glass doors swung open again, and a sharply dressed man strode into the room. Amanda's demeanor transformed instantly. Her irritation melted into a polished smile as she turned her attention away from Henry. Mr. Baldwin, she greeted her, tone now warm and accommodating. So lovely to see you again. How can I assist you today? Henry stepped aside as Amanda engaged the man in lively conversation. The difference in her attitude was stark and deliberate, and Henry felt the familiar ache of being dismissed, of being seen as invisible. Yet he stood patiently, watching as Amanda fawned over the new customer, offering him brochures and speaking with a brightness she hadn't extended to him. When she finally turned back to Henry, the warmth in her expression vanished like a switch had been flipped. Now, where were we? She asked curtly. I'd like to see the S-Class, Henry repeated, his tone unwavering. Amanda sighed, crossing her arms again. I'll be honest with you, sir, she said. These cars aren't for everyone. Maybe you'd feel more comfortable at a general dealership down the road. The words hit like a blow, heavy with scorn and judgment. Henry's chest tightened, but he refused to let her words diminish him. What makes you think I'm not qualified to buy this car? He asked, his voice calm but firm. Amanda hesitated, as if searching for a response that wouldn't betray the prejudice behind her words. It's just a guess, she said finally, her tone dismissive. Henry opened his mouth to reply, but the sound of the glass doors opening again drew both their attention. A commanding figure stepped into the showroom, his presence instantly magnetic. The glass doors swung open, and in walked Daniel Carter, his presence commanding attention the moment he stepped inside. Dressed in a sharply tailored navy suit, with a confident stride and an air of quiet authority, he seemed every bit the billionaire CEO that headlines celebrated. Yet his eyes, sharp and discerning, were not searching for admiration, they were scanning the room. When they landed on Henry, standing stoically near the reception desk, Daniel's demeanor shifted. He saw it immediately, the tension in his father's posture, the tightness around his eyes, and the faint but unmistakable shadow of hurt. Daniel's chest tightened. He knew that look all too well, a look he had hoped never to see again. The years of enduring quiet humiliations, of being dismissed and undervalued, were etched into his father's soul. And now, it was happening here, in a place that should have been a celebration of Henry's accomplishments. As Daniel approached, his polished shoes clicked against the marble floor, each step deliberate and unwavering. The other customers turned to look, sensing his magnetic presence. Even Amanda, who moments ago had been dismissive and curt with Henry, straightened slightly in her chair, her eyes widening as recognition dawned. Dad, Daniel said softly, his voice low but filled with concern. Is everything all right? Henry hesitated, his lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't want to burden his son, didn't want to cause a scene. But Daniel's gaze was firm, unwavering, silently demanding the truth. No, son, Henry finally admitted, his voice steady but tinged with quiet dignity. Not exactly. Daniel's jaw tightened as he glanced between his father and Amanda, who now seemed frozen in place. The room, once filled with the hum of quiet luxury, felt suddenly charged with unspoken tension. Daniel turned his gaze toward Amanda, his expression sharp and unrelenting. Her earlier confidence seemed to dissolve as she met his eyes, her posture stiffening under the weight of his silent scrutiny. He took a measured step forward, his voice calm but laced with a cold edge. "Would you care to explain what just happened here?" he asked, his tone polite but unmistakably firm. Amanda faltered, her professional composure cracking slightly. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't realize," she began, but Daniel cut her off. "Didn't realize what?" he pressed. "Didn't realize that the man you dismissed so casually happens to be my father? Or didn't realize he's deserving of basic respect, regardless of who he's related to?" Henry, standing nearby, shifted uneasily. "Daniel, there's no need to." "No, Dad," Daniel said firmly, his eyes never leaving Amanda. "This needs to be addressed." Amanda swallowed hard, her usual poise nowhere to be found. "Sir, I didn't mean to be disrespectful," she stammered, but her words rang hollow. Daniel raised an eyebrow, his voice growing colder. "Oh, but you did. You made assumptions based on nothing but appearances. You judged my father before he even had the chance to explain why he was here. Is that how you treat all your customers, or just the ones you think don't fit in?" Amanda opened her mouth to respond but hesitated, clearly searching for words that could salvage the situation. "It wasn't my intention," she began weakly, her voice trailing off under Daniel's unrelenting stare. "Intentions mean nothing if your actions speak louder," Daniel retorted, his tone cutting. "You don't get to decide who deserves to stand here. This is a place of business, not your personal court of judgment." The air in the showroom had shifted entirely. The low hum of conversations had ceased, and every eye was now trained on the confrontation unfolding near the reception desk. Amanda, visibly flustered, glanced around nervously, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Henry placed a gentle hand on Daniel's shoulder, his voice calm and measured. "Son, let's not escalate this." But Daniel wasn't finished. "Dad, this isn't just about you. This is about everyone who's been treated like they don't belong simply because of the way they look. She needs to understand that her behavior has consequences." Amanda's lips tightened, but before she could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted the charged moment. The tense silence was broken by the measured footsteps of a man approaching. Richard Monroe, the showroom manager, stepped into view. His tailored suit and perfectly combed salt and pepper hair projected an air of authority, but his tightly clenched jaw hinted at the unease brewing beneath the surface. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone polite yet firm as his eyes flicked from Daniel to Amanda and then to Henry. "Yes," Daniel replied without hesitation, his voice steady but charged. "It seems your staff has forgotten the basic principles of respect and professionalism." Richard's gaze lingered on Amanda for a brief moment, her discomfort evident in the way she avoided his eyes. Clearing his throat, he turned back to Daniel, a conciliatory smile spreading across his face. "Mr. Carter, I assure you, this is all just a misunderstanding. Amanda was merely trying to uphold our standards here at Maybach Motors." "Your standards?" Daniel said, his tone sharp. "And what standards are those? Judging customers based on their appearance instead of their merit?" "Mr. Carter, I understand your frustration," Richard said, his voice now tinged with a practiced calm. "But please know that we value every customer who walks through our doors." Daniel stepped closer, his presence almost overwhelming. "If that were true, you wouldn't need to defend behavior like this. My father deserves better than being dismissed like he doesn't belong." Richard's smile faltered for the briefest moment before he forced it back. "Of course, Mr. Carter. Let's move this conversation to my office, where we can resolve this privately. We pride ourselves on offering the highest level of service, and I'd hate for you to leave with a bad impression." Daniel's gaze was unwavering. "You don't seem to understand. This isn't just about my father. It's about the culture you've fostered here. If I hadn't walked in, would this conversation even be happening? Or would he have been turned away in silence?" The weight of Daniel's words hung heavily in the air. Richard hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "We'll make amends," he said finally, his voice softer now. Let's find a way to move forward. But Daniel wasn't ready to relent. Amends mean nothing if the root of the problem isn't addressed. You don't just owe my father an apology, you owe him the respect he should have been given from the start. Henry, standing quietly beside his son, placed a hand on Daniel's arm, his voice calm but firm. Daniel, let's leave it here, he said. We've made our point. Daniel turned to his father, his voice steady yet brimming with conviction. Dad, you've given everything to make sure I had a better life. You've endured more than anyone should, and still, you've carried yourself with dignity. You don't deserve this, not here, not anywhere. Henry's gaze softened, and for a moment, it seemed he would speak. But Daniel's focus had already shifted, his eyes locking onto Richard with an intensity that froze the manager in place. You think an apology fixes this? Daniel asked, his voice calm but cold. You think a few words can erase the way your staff judged my father, dismissed him, and made him feel like he didn't belong? Richard opened his mouth, but Daniel didn't give him the chance. Let me tell you something about my father, Daniel continued. He's the hardest working man I've ever known. He's sacrificed everything for his family, and he's taught me the values that made me who I am. And you, Daniel's voice rose slightly, each word cutting through the tense silence. You dare to treat him like he's less than? Like he doesn't matter because he doesn't fit your idea of who should walk into this showroom. Amanda stood frozen near the reception desk, her earlier confidence replaced by visible discomfort. The weight of Daniel's words seemed to echo across the room, and even the few remaining customers had stopped to watch. Richard attempted to regain control. Mr. Carter, I assure you. Assure me of what? Daniel snapped, his voice sharp now. That this was a misunderstanding? That this isn't how your staff usually behaves? Don't insult my intelligence. If I hadn't walked in here, what would have happened? My father would have left, humiliated, and you'd all go on with your day as if nothing had happened. That's your standard, isn't it? Henry placed a gentle hand on Daniel's arm. Son, he said softly, there's no need to escalate this. We've made our point. But Daniel shook his head, his eyes never leaving Richard. No, Dad. This isn't just about us. It's about everyone who's ever been treated this way. It's about people like Amanda here. He gestured toward the receptionist, who think they can judge someone's worth based on their shoes, their coat, or the color of their skin. Amanda's cheeks flushed, and she looked down, unable to meet Daniel's gaze. Richard's voice faltered slightly as he attempted to respond. At Maybach Motors, we value every customer. This situation is not indicative of... Stop, Daniel interrupted, his tone commanding. Don't hide behind corporate platitudes. Admit the truth. Admit that my father was treated unfairly. Admit that he was judged and dismissed because he didn't fit the image you want to project here. Until you do, nothing you say will matter. The room had grown oppressively quiet, the tension thick enough to cut. Henry, ever the steady presence, spoke again, his tone calm but firm. Daniel, you've said enough? No, Dad, Daniel replied, his voice softening slightly. This isn't enough. This is about more than just today. This is about showing them that their actions have consequences. Henry shook his head gently. Son, I've been through worse. I don't need their apology. I don't need their respect. I have something far more valuable, you, and the life I built for our family. That's what matters. Daniel hesitated, his chest rising and falling as he tried to contain his frustration. He turned back to Richard, his expression unyielding. You should think long and hard about how you treat people. Because the next time this happens, it won't just be me calling you out. It'll be the world. Richard swallowed hard, his usual confidence shaken. We'll do better, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Henry placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. Let's go, he said simply. We don't need anything from them. Daniel hesitated for a moment longer before nodding. You're right, Dad. Let's leave. But I hope they remember this moment, because I won't let them forget. As the two men turned to leave, The room remained silent, the weight of what had just unfolded hanging heavily in the air. As the tension reached its peak, Henry gently placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. His voice, calm but resolute, cut through the heavy silence. "Daniel," he began, his tone carrying a weight that demanded attention. "Let's not let their actions dictate how we carry ourselves. I've faced worse in my life, and I've learned one thing: dignity isn't something anyone can take away from you. It's something you carry inside." Daniel turned to his father, his expression a mix of frustration and admiration. "But Dad," he protested, "they disrespected you. They looked at you like you didn't belong. That's not okay." Henry nodded slowly. "You're right, it's not okay. But I didn't come here for their approval. I came here for a moment of joy, for a symbol of a life well lived. And no amount of judgment or prejudice can take that from me." The room remained silent as Henry turned his gaze toward Richard and Amanda. His voice, though quiet, resonated with a power that needed no volume. "I pity you," he said softly. "You live in a world where you judge people by their appearance, where you can't see the value of a person beyond what's on the surface. That's your loss, not mine." Richard shifted uncomfortably, his carefully crafted facade cracking under the weight of Henry's words. Amanda stared at the floor, her earlier confidence replaced by visible shame. Turning back to Daniel, Henry's expression softened. "Son, you've shown me today just how deeply you care. That means more to me than anything they could ever offer. Let's leave this place. We don't need their validation." Daniel hesitated, his jaw tightening as he glanced at the staff who had wronged his father. But as he looked back at Henry, he saw the calm resolve in his father's eyes, a strength built over decades of quiet endurance. Slowly, he nodded. "Let's go," Daniel said, his voice quieter now. Together, father and son turned and began walking toward the door. Their footsteps echoed in the now silent showroom, a powerful reminder to everyone present that dignity is carried by those who refuse to let prejudice define them. As Henry and Daniel stepped out into the brisk November air, the rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, casting a silver glow over the wet pavement. The silence between them was filled with an unspoken understanding, a bond that didn't need words. Henry took a deep breath, his shoulders relaxing as he looked up at the cloudy sky. "You know, son," Henry said after a moment, his voice steady but reflective, "this isn't the first time I've been judged by how I look. And it probably won't be the last. But what matters isn't their judgment, it's how we carry ourselves. That's something no one can take from us." Daniel nodded, his frustration ebbing as he listened to his father's words. "You're right, Dad," he replied, his voice quieter now. "But it doesn't make it any less wrong. People like them need to understand that respect isn't conditional. It's not something you give or take based on appearances." Henry placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his gaze filled with pride. "You've already taught them something today, Daniel. You stood up, not just for me, but for something bigger. And that means more to me than any car ever could." They walked side by side, the distant hum of the city blending with the soft rhythm of their footsteps. For Henry, this day wasn't a loss. It was a victory, a moment to see his son embody every value he had worked so hard to instill. The lesson wasn't just for Amanda, Richard, or anyone else in that showroom. It was for anyone who's ever doubted their worth or let the world's prejudices define them. Henry's journey reminded us all that true value comes not from wealth or status but from the integrity we carry and the love we give. As they turned the corner, Daniel glanced at his father, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You know, Dad," he said, "maybe we don't need a car to celebrate. How about dinner on me instead?" Henry chuckled softly, nodding. "Now that's an offer I won't refuse." Their laughter echoed briefly, fading into the sound of the city as they disappeared into the crowd, a father and son, walking away not with a car but with something far more meaningful, a shared sense of dignity, love, and resilience. And there's a lesson here for all of us. Prejudice is still far too common, but we have the power to challenge it, not with anger, but with dignity, courage, and conviction. Like Henry and Daniel, we can show the world that our worth isn't dictated by appearances but by the values we live by every day. Thank you for watching this story. If it resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one. Together, let's keep spreading messages of hope, resilience, and justice.